I spent most of my life working as a security guard. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Gas stations, convenience stores, small shops, places where most of the job is just sitting around, watching. So when I saw the ad for a night shift at the local mall, I thought I'd finally caught a break. The pay was better than anything I'd had in years, and the horse 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. weren't bad either. One building, a few rounds, and a quiet shift. Easy money. I pictured myself in the security office, sipping coffee and half watching the camera feeds, strolling through an empty mall that felt too big for the silence. I applied immediately. The next day, I got a call. The manager, Mr. Hensley, wanted me in for an interview that afternoon. No waiting, no back and forth, just straight to business. It felt sudden, but I wasn't about to question it. I needed the job. I drove over, a strange feeling gnawing at me. Was the mall really that desperate for a night guard? The interview was quick, too quick. Hensley asked about my experience, but his eyes were elsewhere, his mind clearly on something else. He ran through the basics, checked the cameras every 15 to 30 minutes, do hourly patrols, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, at the end, he leaned forward and asked, "Can you start tonight?" That caught me off guard. No background checks, no waiting period. But I wasn't about to turn it down. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice steady. His shoulders relaxed, as if I'd just solved a problem for him. "Good. We're understaffed," he admitted, rubbing his temples. "Last few guards didn't last. I hope you'll be different." Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. Before I could ask what he meant, he was already handing me the keys to the office. 11 p.m. sharp, he said. "See you in the morning." That night, I arrived at the mall to find it dark and lifeless. During the day, the parking lot would be crammed with cars. Now, only a handful Saturday scattered under the flickering glow of the overhead lights. The emptiness made the building feel enormous, like a sleeping giant. For a second, I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong. I shook it off as first-day nerves and walked to the employee entrance. Mr. Hensley met me at the door without a word, and led me through the back corridors to the security office. It was a small, cramped space lined with monitors, displaying grainy black and white footage. "Check the cameras every 15 to 30 minutes, he reminded me. "Do your rounds, make sure nothing's out of place. The usual." Then, after a pause, he added, "And keep an eye on the escalators and the play area." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "Why?" I asked. He waved a hand dismissively. "Kids, mostly, trying to sneak in, mess around after hours." But the way he avoided my gaze said otherwise. He handed me a printed list of instructions, shook my hand, and left. And then, I was alone. The silence wrapped around me, heavy and absolute. I settled into the chair, flipping through the camera feeds. The mall was still, the stores locked up, the escalators frozen mid-climb. For a moment, I let myself relax. It was just a mall, just another shift. Then, out of nowhere, I felt it. A presence behind me. I spun, hard hammering. A janitor stood there, grinning like he found my reaction amusing. "Didn't mean to scare you, buddy," he chuckled. "You must be the new guy." I exhaled a shaky laugh. "Yeah, didn't realize there was a janitor here at night. They always keep one of us around," he said. "Clean up, make sure everything's in order." Then his expression darkened. "Just make sure you follow the rules." I frowned. The instructions. No, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. His voice was quiet now, serious. Ways. I took the paper, expecting some kind of joke, but as I unfolded it, my stomach tightened. Rules to keep you safe at night. Rule 1. Check the cameras every 15 to 30 minutes, but don't stare at the footage for too long. Rule 2. Never look directly at the mannequins after midnight. If the mannequins change position, leave the area immediately. I swallowed hard. You're serious? The janitor wasn't smiling anymore. I'm warning you, follow the rules, or you'll end up like the last guy. I tried to brush it off. The last guard. He nodded. He quit after one night. I stuffed the paper into my pocket, forcing a chuckle. Well, I'm gonna make my first round. The janitor stepped aside, watching me carefully. Take care. His words stuck with me as I stepped into the empty corridors. At first, it was just a mall, silent, lifeless. The dim lighting casts long, twisting shadows along the tiled floors. Every sound felt louder: me footsteps, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant creaks of the buildings settling. I walked past shuttered storefronts, their dark displays peeking from behind glass. Children's play area stood empty near the food court, its colorful plastic structures weirdly ominous under the dim glow of the emergency lights. Then, I reached the escalators. They stood frozen in place, unmoving. I was getting used to the quiet when I noticed something ahead. One of the clothing stores. Its door was wide open. I stopped in my tracks, sweeping my flashlight over the darkened store interior. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. Racks of neatly folded clothes, shelves lined with accessories, mannequins standing in their usual, lifeless poses. But as I shifted the beam, something flickered in my peripheral vision, a slight movement, like a shadow shifting where there shouldn't be one. I turned my head sharply. Nothing, just the mannequins near the back, frozen in place. Exhaling, I forced a laugh under my breath. It was nothing, just my nerves. I wasn't going to let a crumpled list of superstitions get into my head. Then, the sound. A faint rustling, the unmistakable whisper of fabric shifting. My flashlight jerked back to the mannequins. One of them was different. It had moved. I was sure of it. Before, it had been turned slightly to the side. Now, it was facing the exit. My pulse slammed against my ribs. "All right, very funny," I called out, my voice unnaturally loud in the empty store. The janitor had to be messing with me. Maybe there was a hidden speaker, or a remote control gimmick, some kind of stupid prank for the new guy. But the silence that followed was thick and absolute. And behind me another sound, a soft, deliberate shuffle. I turned slowly, my breath catching. The mannequin had moved again. It was standing in the middle of the store now, inches closer to me than before. That was it. I was done. I backed out of the store, keeping my eyes locked on the mannequin until I cleared the doorway. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I turned, ready to speed walk back to the security office. I heard it again. Footsteps. But not normal ones. These were slow, deliberate, heavy, scraping sounds like something dragging against the towel. A chill shot through me. I turned. The mannequin was standing in the hallway now. Not inside the store, not where I had left it. I felt the air leave my lungs as every muscle in my body locked up. It was staring at me, or at least, it felt like it was. Oh, it had no eyes. The skin on my arms prickled. The mall, so vast and silent just moments ago, suddenly felt unbearably small, like it was closing in. The mannequin took another step. The stiff creak of plastic joints, the slow, agonizing scrape of its foot against the floor. I ran. I didn't think, didn't breathe, just turned and bolted down the corridor, my footsteps echoing wildly against the cold, lifeless walls. I veered toward the restroom hallway, ducking inside without stopping. Cold water. I needed cold water. My hands shook as I twisted the faucet, splashing my face, trying to drown out the rapid thud of my pulse in my ears. I lifted my head. In the mirror, behind me, a woman stood near the stalls. She faced away, dressed in a plain cleaner's uniform, motionless. My stomach dropped. I spun around. Nothing. The restroom was empty. I staggered back, gripping the sink for support. My mind raced, clawing for logic, for reason, but all I could think about was the list. I yanked the crumpled paper from my pocket, unfolding it with trembling fingers. My eyes locked onto the words, my breath catching in my throat. Rule 3. If a mannequin looks like it's following you, don't look back. If you ignore them, they'll stop. If you look, they'll know you're aware, and they'll get closer. I had looked. Rule 4. Avoid looking into the mirrors in the restroom. Too late. My hands shook as I forced myself to keep reading. Rule 5. If you hear someone talking inside an abandoned store, do not listen. A soft murmur floated through the silence. It was faint, almost indistinguishable beneath the hum of the mall's air conditioning, but I heard it. A voice, coming from an abandoned store just down the hall. I frowned, heart slamming against my ribs. No, 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 no. I forced my feet to move, walking fast, my gaze locked straight ahead. The voice stayed low at first, a whisper, words just being a comprehension, but as I passed the storefront, the volume rose. The words were garbled, unnatural, like someone speaking underwater. I clenched my jaw, speeding up. Don't listen, don't listen. The voice grew louder. My ears rang with the effort of shutting it out, drowning it beneath the sound of my own footsteps. The store's windows were papered over, shielding whatever was inside from view. I didn't want to know. I passed it. The voice stopped. I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to keep moving, but just as I rounded the corner, I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Not normal. A slow, dragging scrape against the tile. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I already knew what was there. I walked faster, my body rigid with terror. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to look, to do something, but I knew better now. Just keep walking. The sound followed me, methodical. Then, finally, silence. I reached the security office, slamming the door behind me. My breathing was ragged, my skin clammy. My fingers fumbled for the keys, locking the door in a frenzy before collapsing into the chair. I forced myself to check my watch. 1 a.m. That was right, wasn't it? I wasn't sure anymore. My gaze flicked to the list. I needed to memorize it, every single rule. I skimmed down. Rule 8. Lock the security office door between 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. If someone knocks, do not open it. Check the cameras. They might not be who you think they are. A chill ran through me. Rule 9. If you hear someone crying in a dressing room, do not open the door. Rule 10. If you hear an escalator running, do not investigate. Watch the area on the security cameras. A distant hum filled the air. Faint, but unmistakable. The sound of an escalator. I looked up at the monitors, dreading what I might see. And 10. The feed flickered, and something was on the screen. I could hear the escalator in the distance steady. Mechanical were growing louder, but I didn't stop. I sprinted into the security office, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I flipped through the monitors, searching for the source of the sound. Then I saw it. A figure stood on the escalator. It wasn't a person. Not exactly. It was too tall, its limbs too long and spindly, its face swallowed by the shadows. The way it moved, jerky, unnatural, made my stomach twist. As the escalator carried it upward, its head turned, slow and deliberate, until it was looking directly at the camera. Directly at me. Static filled the screen, a sharp, grating buzz reverberating through the room. I recoiled, tearing my gaze away just in time. Rule on it: don't stare at the footage for too long. The moment I looked back, the screen cleared. The escalator was empty. I slumped into my chair, my body trembling. I couldn't do this anymore. These rules weren't just warnings. They were survival tactics, and I was barely hanging on. The next few hours crawled by in silence. I stayed in the office, glued to the monitors, too shaken to patrol again. The mall was still, no movement, no sound, just the dim hum of electricity. At 4:03 a.m., there was a knock at the door. I jumped, my pulse spiking. The camera feed outside showed nothing, just the empty hallway stretching into the dark. But the knocking came again, 3 sharp, deliberate raps. Then a voice. "Hey, how's the night going? Still think the rules are funny?" The janitor, or something that sounded like him. My stomach twisted. Rule 8. Lock the door between 4 and 4:30. Do not open it for anyone. I checked the camera again. The hallway was still empty. "Come on," the voice coaxed. "Open up. I'll tell you what's really going on." My hand hovered near the handle, but I didn't move. The knocking grew more insistent, the voice almost amused now. Silence. I exhaled shakily, checking the monitors once more. This time, the janitor was there, standing directly outside the office, staring into the camera with a grin that stretched too wide. My breath hitched. His body wavered, like smoke struggling to hold its shape. Then, slowly, it dissolved into nothing. I glanced at the clock for 4:30 a.m. Whatever that was, it was gone now. For the first time in hours, the air felt lighter, but I wasn't foolish enough to believe the night was over. I stood, stretching my aching muscles. Staying locked inside the office felt suffocating, but another full patrol was out of the question. I settled on a short walk just around the immediate area, enough to shake the lingering dread clinging to my skin. The mall was still a tomb of silence. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, restless shadows across the floor. I kept my eyes forward, avoiding the darkened storefronts, the mannequins standing motionless in the dim light. Then I turned a corner and nearly collided with him. The janitor, leaning casually against the wall, grinning like we were old friends. "Rough night?" Kay asked. His tone was light, teasing, but something about it made my skin crawl. I stared at him, my mind flashing back to the figure outside the office, to the impossible way it had vanished. "You could say that," I muttered, throat dry. His grin faded slightly. "You followed the rules, didn't you?" I tried. My voice felt small. "What is this place? Why do we need the rules?" His chuckle was low, hollow. "To keep you safe." I stepped back. "Safe from what?" He shrugged, his grin returning. "You'll figure it out. Or maybe you won't." His eyes darkened. "Either way, there's no escaping it." He turned and walked away, slow and deliberate, disappearing down a dim corridor. I hesitated only a moment before following. Wait, what do you mean? No escaping. I rounded the corner, and he was gone. A chill crept up my spine. I turned in slow circles, scanning the empty hallway. He couldn't have just disappeared. Then I heard it. A soft, muffled sobbing. My blood ran cold. It was faint, barely there, but the longer I stood still, the clearer it became. A woman's voice, crying. I swallowed hard. I knew the rules. I knew exactly what this was. Rule 9. If you hear someone crying in a dressing room, do not open the door. I clenched my fists, willing my legs to move, to walk away, but the sound was drawing me in, pulling at something deep inside me. What if someone really needed help? What if this was just a trick? What if? I shook my head violently, snapping myself out of it. I turned on my heel and walked away. Faster. Just as I reached the end of the hall, the crying stopped, and a voice whispered right behind me. I knew you'd listen. I had already broken too many rules tonight. This wasn't a joke. The janitor had warned me, and I wasn't about to ignore him now. But still, the crying continued, louder, more insistent, echoing from somewhere deeper in the store ahead. It didn't sound right, too hollow, too distorted, like a recording of someone crying rather than an actual person. I stood there, torn between curiosity and fear, until the decision was made for me. The crying stopped. Suddenly, everything went silent, too silent. The air thickened, pressing in on me like the walls themselves were closing. My chest tightened, and I realized I had been holding my breath. Then, slowly, a figure appeared on the security cameras. Even though I had stepped away from the office, I was monitoring the corridor on my device. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. There she was. A woman, pale, with long, dark hair that hung limply over her face. Her clothes were old-fashioned, plain, and she moved with a strange, unnatural hunch. She wasn't walking. She was floating. My heart shot into my throat as I watched her glide down the hallway, inching closer to the dressing room. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and she hovered just outside the door, as though waiting for me to follow. I took a step back, pulse hammering in my chest. This couldn't be real. I'd seen strange things tonight, but this was something else entirely. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing her to disappear. When I opened them again, she was gone. But the crying started up again, right behind me. I didn't think, I just ran. The sound of her cries followed me, growing louder, more desperate with each step. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there. By the time I reached the security office, my legs were shaking, my breath ragged. I slammed the door shut and locked it as quickly as I could. Collapsing into the chair, I stared at the monitors, trying to steady my pulse. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. I felt cornered, trapped, like I was prey with nowhere to run. I glanced at the monitors, and there she was again. The woman, floating down the hallway, moving in that unnatural way. She wasn't just roaming anymore. She was heading straight for the security office. My blood went cold. I watched her drift closer and closer, her limbs stiff, her face hidden beneath her hair. Her presence seemed to distort the very air around her, warping reality itself. I checked the camera feeds, flipping through every angle, but she was getting nearer with every passing second. My breath quickened. I reached for the list of rules, gripping it tight in my trembling hands. Don't open the door. I repeated it over and over in my mind, trying to hold on to some shred of sanity. Don't open the door, no matter what. She stopped right outside the security office. I could see her clearly on the monitor now. She stood still, unmoving, like some twisted statue. For a moment, I dared to hope that maybe she would leave, that maybe she was nothing more than a figment of my tired mind. But then the knocking started. Soft at first, barely a tap, but it grew louder, more forceful, until it felt like the entire door was rattling. I could feel her on the other side, her presence so heavy, so oppressive. It felt like she was suffocating me. I checked the monitor again, praying she'd vanish. She didn't. Her body was rigid, like a frozen silhouette, but the knocking didn't stop. It grew more violent. The door frame rattled like it couldn't hold much longer. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sound. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the knocking only intensified, pounding against the door like someone was trying to break it down. My heart was in my throat, and I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place. Then, I heard it. "Hey, open up, it's the manager." I frowned. The voice was too familiar. It was Mr. Hensley. But something felt wrong. I glanced at the clock, 6:01 a.m. Relief hit me like a wave, but suspicion crept in fast. Was it really him, or was this another trick? I checked the camera again. The woman was gone. No sign of her, no shadow, no trace of her eerie presence. "Everything okay in there, Mr. Hensley's voice came again, now sounding closer, more concerned. "Open up, your shift's over." I hesitated. My hand hovered near the door handle. I'd made it. The night was over, and I'd survived. But the events of the past few hours had shaken me to my core, and I wasn't ready to trust anything at all. I glanced at the monitor one last time. I needed to be sure. And there he was. Mr. Hensley, standing just outside the door, looking exactly like he had when I first met him. No distorted face, no ghostly presence. Just him. I unlocked the door, trembling, and opened it. He smiled warmly when he saw my expression. "Rough night, he asked, his voice full of concern. I nodded slowly, still trying to process everything. "Yeah, you could say that." He frowned as he took in my haunted expression. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I gave a bitter laugh. Something like that. But I didn't go into detail. I didn't tell him about the mannequin or the crying woman. It didn't feel real anymore. I was just glad to be done. But as I handed him my keys and quit on the spot, something gnawed at me. I had to know. "What about the janitor?" I asked suddenly, "the one who works the night shift." Mr. Hensley looked confused. "What janitor?" My stomach dropped. "The one who was here all night." He gave me a list of rules. Mr. Hensley shook his head. "There's no janitor. No one works here at night, except you." My mind reeled. None of this made sense. I stared at him, my thoughts spinning. If there was no janitor, then what had been warning me? Where had the rules come from? I didn't ask any more questions. I handed over my keys and walked out of the mall without looking back. Whatever had happened there, whatever lurked in the dark corners of that place, I wasn't going to stick around to find out more. As I drove away, the weight of the night still pressing on my chest, I realized some places are better left alone. And that mall, it was one of them. I will never return.